moments when the soul grows quiet, when the noise of the world fades, and what remains is an uneasy hunger, not the hunger of the body, but of the heart, a gnawing craving that cannot be filled by bread or applause or even prayer spoken without truth. In those moments man looks for something to bite into, something to soothe the ache of being half awake, and, like a child reaching for sweets before supper, he devours what looks nourishing but is, in truth, poison wrapped in sugar. These are the spiritual snacks of the age, things so common, so seemingly harmless, that they pass for nourishment. Yet they hollow out the spirit, one indulgence at a time. The first cursed snack is comfort disguised as peace. The soul loves peace, but it mistakes peace for the absence of struggle. It forgets that Christ's peace was found not in the quiet of gardens, but in the storm of sacrifice. We crave comfort because comfort numbs us. It tells us we are safe while our purpose withers. The man who seeks peace through avoidance has not found peace. He has found sedation. The man who silences conviction in the name of balance has not grown wise. He has simply surrendered. Comfort is not rest. It is a counterfeit resurrection, a Sunday without the cross. And so, many sit in pews and sing of courage, but when the hour of testing comes, their faith crumbles beneath the weight of their convenience. The world has taught them to crave soft pillows over strong purpose, approval over truth, safety over growth. And yet the soul, made for eternity, cannot breathe in such air. It begins to suffocate in the comfort it once called peace. We build lives padded with distractions, we decorate our prisons with beautiful verses, and we call the numbness blessing. We forget that the lion does not sleep in silk, he rests on rock and roars at dawn. We forget that peace is not the absence of storms, but the calm eye within them. True peace is born when the spirit, though shaken, does not break, when the heart, though pierced, still sings, when the man, though surrounded by fear, still stands and says, "I will not move." Peace is a covenant between faith and fire. It is not purchased with ease, but earned through endurance. The second cursed snack is praise without obedience. It tastes sweet because it flatters the ego. It is religion without surrender, worship without transformation. The tongue sings, but the heart remains untouched. The man prays for blessing while secretly negotiating with his own idols. He believes himself faithful because he feels inspired, not because he is changed. The modern soul treats worship as a mood, not a mirror. It asks for miracles, but refuses to move. It claps for grace, but hides from conviction. And so the sacred becomes entertainment, the sanctuary becomes a stage. The applause replaces repentance, and the amen becomes the applause of the self. But praise without obedience is like light without heat. It illuminates but does not purify. The devil himself knew the scriptures. He simply refused to kneel to them. So do many today. They quote but do not live. They post but do not pray. They raise their hands on Sunday and raise their pride on Monday. And in that duplicity, they starve, for man cannot eat symbols and call it sustenance. The bread of heaven is obedience. The banquet of eternity is the will surrendered, not the song performed. When your life becomes the altar, every step is worship, every act is prayer, every hardship becomes incense. That is what the saints understood. They did not perform holiness. They embodied it in their wounds. The third cursed snack is knowledge without humility. The mind, once enlightened, begins to adore itself. It delights in the sophistication of its own understanding and mistakes awareness for wisdom. It reads Scripture as if dissecting an insect, searching for proof instead of presence. It argues about doctrine while ignoring the poor. It wins debates, but loses compassion. The intellectual Christian feasts upon theology, but starves of grace. He mistakes information for intimacy. He studies God as a subject rather than loves him as a person. He sees the Word as text rather than voice. And so his soul grows brittle, brilliant, but barren, articulate, but empty. True wisdom is not cleverness, it is clarity born from surrender. It is not the mind that wins arguments, but the heart that kneels in wonder. For the proud intellect cannot receive revelation, only opinion. But the humble spirit, the one who admits, I do not know, but I will listen, that one is taught by heaven itself. Humility opens the window through which light becomes understanding. Pride seals it shut. And so the age grows darker, though its people have never known so much. We confuse access with awareness, and noise with knowing. Yet the soul still whispers, be still. For the stillness of humility is the soil where wisdom takes root. The fourth cursed snack is charity without sacrifice. We give, but not until it costs. We love, but not until it inconveniences. We serve, but only when we are seen. This is not generosity, it is transaction. The world applauds the gesture, but heaven sees the motive. True charity is not an act of surplus, but of surrender. It begins where comfort ends. It is the widow's coin, the father's patience, the friend's forgiveness, the unseen, uncelebrated gift that costs something eternal. When you give without losing, you have not yet loved. When you love without pain, you have not yet given. And yet, the modern heart fears sacrifice. It has mistaken abundance for excess and thinks that comfort is proof of divine favor. But love that does not bleed is not love. It is sentiment. The cross was not beautiful because it was noble. It was beautiful because it was necessary. To give what does not wound you is to offer God an empty altar. To love only those who love you back is to eat of your own vanity. True wealth is found in what you give that cannot be repaid. And when you give without needing return, you step into the economy of heaven where loss becomes treasure, and every act of genuine love multiplies beyond measure. The fifth cursed snack is faith without transformation. This is the most subtle poison, for it masquerades as life while slowly decaying the spirit. Faith that does not renew the mind is superstition. Belief that does not change behavior is self-deception. To claim faith is to claim a new birth, not a new vocabulary. Many speak of being saved, yet continue to live as though their chains were jewelry. They talk of grace, but show no gratitude. They repeat verses of strength, but remain victims of fear. This is the spiritual obesity of the modern age. Faith consumed, but never exercised. We grow heavy with inspiration and light on conviction. But faith, true faith, is not a mood or a mantra. It is movement, a living current that turns belief into becoming. It changes the eyes so that even darkness reveals light. It changes the hands so that giving becomes instinct. It changes the heart so that pain becomes purpose. It is not a superstition you keep in your pocket. It is a fire that consumes the false self until only truth remains. And yet, this fire terrifies us. We prefer the idea of transformation to the act itself, because transformation means death. The death of pride, the death of self-importance, the death of comfort. But only through that death comes resurrection. Only through surrender do we rise. So the soul, once hungry for truth, finds itself surrounded by easy snacks, comfort without purpose, praise without obedience, knowledge without humility, charity without sacrifice, faith without transformation. Each one tastes good for a moment, but leaves the heart emptier than before. These are not sins of rebellion, but of substitution, the soul choosing imitation over intimacy. They are not curses cast upon us by the world, but cravings we have chosen to feed. The devil need not tempt us with grand wickedness when he can distract us with soft lies. The greatest tragedy is not to fall, but to never notice we are sinking. The way back is not through guilt, but through hunger, a holy hunger for what is real. The moment you taste truth again, the false sweetness turns bitter. You begin to see the difference between pleasure and peace, between religion and relationship, between looking blessed and being alive. You realize that wealth is not what fills your hands, but what fills your heart with integrity. That success is not what you earn, but what you endure with faith. That the real abundance is not in the harvest, but in the heart that trusts even when the field is bare. And when you reach that clarity, you understand. To be spiritually rich is to be free from craving what decays. You eat not what flatters your appetite, but what strengthens your soul. You stop feeding the shadow and start nourishing the spirit. You discover that every curse can become a teacher, every hunger a doorway to grace. For what is cursed is not the snack, but the dependence on it. What corrupts is not the world, but the soul that forgets it is divine. The soul that has tasted truth cannot return to sugar without knowing it is poison. Yet, how quickly we do. How quickly the spirit forgets what real nourishment feels like. We are born into hunger, divine hunger, but the world teaches us to feed it with imitation, food, with the applause of men, the comfort of possessions, the illusion of certainty. We live on crumbs and call it blessing. We sip from puddles and call it peace. But there comes a time when the soul revolts. It can no longer pretend to be full. It begins to ache with a sacred dissatisfaction, a whisper that says, "This cannot be all." That whisper is not punishment, it is mercy. It is the voice of the divine reminding you that you were made for more than spiritual snacks. You were made for substance, for truth that burns as it heals, for wisdom that wounds before it awakens. Every hunger you feel, every loneliness, every restlessness is not a curse. It is a compass. It points you back to the table of meaning, to the bread that feeds not just your emotions but your eternity. But the tragedy of the age is that we confuse fullness with distraction. We live in a time when noise has replaced nourishment. People scroll for hours searching for something to fill the silence, not realizing that silence was the meal they needed. The soul grows thin not because food is scarce, but because attention is scattered. The man who cannot sit alone with himself will never dine with truth. He will nibble endlessly on fragments of opinion, gossip, self-help, and spectacle, and yet his heart will still starve for stillness. The modern believer has become addicted to momentum. He prays quickly. He consumes sermons like entertainment. He wants enlightenment on demand. But God does not deliver wisdom in minutes. Truth is not fast food. It is a feast prepared slowly in the furnace of waiting. The curse of impatience is that it blinds you to the sacred process. You cannot microwave transformation. The fire must do its work. The waiting is not a delay, it is the classroom of the soul. We chase blessings like children chasing butterflies, fascinated by beauty, unwilling to endure metamorphosis. But the cocoon is the curse. We avoid the tight, dark, unseen place where the old self must dissolve. No one applauds in the cocoon. No one likes the silence there. Yet that is where wings are formed. The world glorifies arrival, but heaven glorifies becoming. And until we stop craving shortcuts, we will keep circling the same wilderness, mistaking motion for progress. You see, wealth itself is not wicked. It is only dangerous when it becomes the substitute for wonder. Money is not evil. It is a magnifier. It reveals what already reigns in the heart. If your heart worships comfort, money will build you a palace of passivity. If your heart worships power, money will turn you into a tyrant of subtle pride. But if your heart is aligned with truth, money becomes a servant of good. It becomes a mirror of moral architecture. The danger lies not in gold, but in forgetting that gold is dust compared to conscience. The modern mind loves to argue about prosperity. It either worships it or condemns it, not realizing both are extremes of ignorance. Prosperity is neither proof of virtue nor evidence of vice. It is a test. It asks the question, what will you do when you have enough to become what you truly are? The poor man dreams of wealth, believing it will heal him. The rich man fears poverty, believing it will expose him. But both are deceived, for true abundance is not in having or lacking, but in not being owned by either. The heart that clings to things loses its wings. The spirit that worships possessions becomes possessed. To own is not sin. To be owned is. The cursed snack here is not the coin. It is the craving that controls you. For what you crave you become servant to. You kneel before what you fear losing. The truly wealthy man is not the one who can buy everything, but the one who can lose everything and remain unshaken. Look around you. The world is full of people with full hands and empty eyes. They have built kingdoms of comfort, but have lost their thrones of meaning. They wear crowns of success, but bow to anxiety in secret. They speak of blessings, yet cannot sleep. For what is it to gain the world and lose your soul? Not in the fiery, dramatic sense, but in the quiet erosion of purpose. It is to forget why you were created. It is to build monuments to your own ego and call them miracles. The greatest poverty in the modern world is not hunger for bread, but hunger for being. People no longer know who they are without noise, without affirmation, without the approval of strangers. They live in mirrors instead of in minds. They crave visibility more than virtue. They worship relevance more than righteousness. And so they snack on attention like addicts, every like, every view, every validation becomes their communion. But this digital bread does not nourish, it only numbs. The soul becomes an algorithm, trained to chase dopamine instead of destiny. But God still calls, not through thunder, not through spectacle, but through subtlety. Through that ache you feel when you achieve everything you wanted and still feel hollow, through the whisper that follows every victory. Is this all? That is the divine hunger calling you back to wholeness. That is the beginning of wisdom, to recognize the curse disguised as comfort and to hunger again for the eternal. When you begin to awaken, you will feel a strange grief. You will look around and see how much of your life has been built on imitation, how many of your ambitions were borrowed, how many of your beliefs were inherited, how many of your goals were applause in disguise. You will realize that much of what you called God's plan was your own convenience with divine decoration. This revelation will hurt. It must. For the false self dies hard. But after it dies, peace begins to live. And in that death, something extraordinary happens. You start to crave differently. You no longer hunger for recognition, but for righteousness. You no longer crave comfort, but courage. You no longer seek validation, but vision. You begin to see that the greatest wealth is clarity, the kind that cannot be bought, only built through obedience, the kind that lets you walk through storms with serenity, to lose what others worship and yet remain whole. You begin to notice that moral strength is not loud, it is silent resilience. It is the quiet refusal to compromise when compromise would be easy. It is the ability to walk alone without bitterness, to forgive without applause, to remain kind when the world rewards cruelty. That is wealth of the soul. That is the abundance that cannot be taxed or stolen. And so the hunger that once enslaved you becomes sacred. You learn to eat slowly from truth, to savor patience, to drink deeply from gratitude. You begin to realize that spiritual maturity is not a matter of gaining, but of letting go of the need to prove, to possess, to perform. For the kingdom of heaven is not built through addition, but through subtraction. When the unnecessary falls away, the essential begins to shine. And once the unnecessary begins to fall away, you discover something terrifying at first and liberating in the end, that you were never hungry for the world at all. You were hungry for God disguised in meaning. Every craving for success, every thirst for approval, every desire to be seen or celebrated was a distorted echo of one pure longing to be known, to be loved, to belong to something infinite. The soul does not crave wealth. It craves worth. It does not hunger for power. It hungers for purpose. And yet, when it forgets its divine origin, it begins to feast on imitation shadows that promise fullness but dissolve into fog. The tragedy is that man calls these shadows blessings. He prays for miracles but cannot endure correction. He wants freedom but not discipline, reward but not repentance. He wants to wear the crown without carrying the cross. But the crown without the cross is a costume, and the man who wears it becomes an actor in his own deception. For every kingdom without sacrifice is built on sand, and every life that avoids the furnace remains raw, unformed, untested. There is no growth without fire. The seed must split, the shell must break, the ground must wound before anything rises. We speak of faith as if it were comfort, but true faith is confrontation, the confrontation of your own illusions. It is not the avoidance of fear, but the mastery of it. It is the courage to look into the mirror of your soul and see every false god you have built, and to tear them down one by one with trembling hands. We often ask why God seems silent, why clarity hides behind confusion. But silence is not absence, it is surgery. It is the scalpel that cuts away the noise so you can hear what remains. In silence, God does not entertain your comfort. He exposes your dependence. He strips you of your disguises until you can no longer pretend to be holy while secretly feeding the same old hunger for vanity and control. Silence is where the soul learns to breathe again, where faith stops performing and starts becoming. The modern believer fears silence because silence reveals weakness. And yet, weakness is the birthplace of strength. It is the soil in which faith takes root. For as long as you cling to your own ability, you will never see divine power. The moment you let go, not in despair, but in surrender, you open yourself to something far greater than willpower, grace. And grace, when it finally floods the soul, does not flatter, it transforms. It is not sentimental, it is surgical. It does not comfort the ego, it crucifies it. This is the paradox of divine abundance. You gain by giving, rise by kneeling, led by serving, and conquer by surrendering. The world calls this foolishness, but the fool is the one who trades eternal peace for temporary applause. The world tells you to manifest everything you desire. Heaven asks you to master what you desire. The world teaches you to chase happiness. Heaven teaches you to become worthy of it. One path inflates the self, the other redeems it. The true battle for wealth is not in the market, but in the mind. It is not about acquiring gold, but about ruling your own greed. A man can own empires and still be a slave, or he can possess nothing and still be king. The difference is not in possession, but in perception. When your heart is ruled by gratitude, even little becomes infinite. When your heart is ruled by comparison, even abundance becomes lack. Gratitude turns poverty into wisdom. Envy turns wealth into torment. So much of our suffering is born from comparison, from the silent war between who we are and who we pretend to be. We look upon another's harvest and curse our own soil, not realizing that envy blinds us to the blessings already given. Comparison is the thief of joy, but worse than that, it is the assassin of authenticity. It robs you of the courage to be yourself. It whispers that who you are is not enough, and so you begin to perform for God, for others, for your own reflection. But God never asked you to perform. He asked you to become. To become is a sacred rebellion against imitation. It is to walk through fire and come out gold, not glitter. It is to stop hiding behind personas and start living from truth. It is to refuse the cheap snacks of attention, to turn away from the empty calories of self-pity and pride, and to feast instead on discipline, humility, and purpose. The spiritual diet of the soul is made of these things, the bitter herbs that cleanse, the living bread that strengthens, the water of clarity that refreshes without intoxicating. But who teaches this anymore? The pulpits are full of promises without process, of comfort without conviction. The new gospel is success. The new idol is self. And yet, what shall it profit a man to trend for a season and vanish into eternity untransformed? What shall it profit him to speak in the language of faith, but live in the grammar of fear? The tragedy of the age is that the church has learned to entertain the flesh instead of educating the spirit. We have made God small enough to fit in our schedules, our politics, our preferences. We no longer serve him. We market him. But the truth remains unchanged. The soul cannot be marketed. It cannot be seduced by slogans or hashtags. It yearns for reality, and reality is found only when you are stripped of pretense. There, in the raw, unadorned light of awareness, you begin to remember you were made for eternity. You were made for the kind of joy that cannot be bought, the kind of peace that cannot be performed, the kind of love that cannot be faked. That love begins when you stop treating God as a concept and start encountering him as a presence. He does not exist to decorate your life. He exists to define it. He is not a comforting idea. He is a consuming fire. He does not bless your ambition. He transforms it into service. And when that fire touches you, everything false begins to burn. Not as punishment, but as purification. Then you realize the cursed snacks were never evil in themselves. They were invitations to hunger correctly. Comfort was meant to teach endurance, praise to teach obedience, knowledge to teach humility, charity to teach sacrifice, faith to teach transformation. Each one, when redeemed, becomes a feast. The very thing that once corrupted you becomes your teacher. The very craving that once enslaved you becomes your compass. That is the alchemy of grace. It turns poison into medicine, hunger into holiness. And so the man who once begged for blessing now becomes the blessing. He no longer asks for light. He becomes it. He no longer seeks wealth. He radiates it in the currency of kindness, courage, and truth. His presence enriches rooms without words. His integrity builds kingdoms unseen. His peace becomes contagious. His faith unshakable. His life a sermon without sound. He walks among the restless as one who has eaten from a different table, a table not of indulgence, but of illumination. He is no longer tempted by the sugar of approval, because he has tasted the sweetness of surrender. And though the world may not understand him, it cannot ignore him, for he has found what every soul secretly seeks, not the abundance of possessions, but the abundance of purpose. And when that transformation begins, it does not arrive with trumpet blasts or lightning in the sky. It begins quietly, like dawn entering a room, through a crack in the curtain. You do not even notice at first that the darkness is fading. The same routines unfold, the same faces pass by, the same weight of life presses on your shoulders. But something subtle shifts. The bitterness begins to lose its flavor. The old cravings start to feel cheap. The things that once thrilled you now seem hollow. The noise of the world begins to sound distant, muffled, irrelevant. That is the first sign that the divine has begun its secret work when you are no longer satisfied by imitation. Transformation is not about adding anything new to you. It is about removing everything false. The truth was always within you like a sculpture hidden inside marble, waiting for the chisel of experience to carve it free. Pain becomes that chisel. Disappointment becomes that hammer. Every trial you endure, every betrayal, every loss, is not proof of divine neglect, but of divine craftsmanship. You are being shaped for something weightier than comfort. You are being prepared to hold glory without breaking under it. But we resist this shaping. We fight the sculptor's hand because we do not understand the vision. We see only what is being taken away, not what is being revealed. We forget that the fire does not destroy gold, it refines it. The flame that frightens you is the same flame that frees you. The heat that hurts you is the same heat that hardens you into strength. If only we could see that every trial is not punishment but preparation, we would stop begging for escape and start asking for endurance. There is a strength that only suffering can teach, a humility that only failure can grant, a wisdom that only waiting can reveal. You cannot study these things, you must live them. You cannot inherit them. You must earn them in the silence of perseverance. And when you do, when you stop seeing hardship as cruelty and start seeing it as curriculum, your life becomes a testimony instead of a tragedy. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what is this teaching me? The moment that question changes, everything changes. Because now the very pain that once tormented you becomes a teacher. The betrayal that once broke you becomes a mirror. The delay that once frustrated you becomes discipline. You begin to see divine design in every detour. You realize that God has been speaking not through your comfort, but through your challenges. That the closed doors were not denials, but directions. That the losses were not curses, but clearings, making room for what could not grow in crowded soil. And so you begin to live differently. You stop rushing, you stop envying, you stop clinging, you start observing, you start listening, you start trusting, you start living from the inside out instead of the outside in. This is the mark of transformation, when you no longer chase meaning, but create it by the way you live. When you no longer crave certainty, but find peace in surrender. When you no longer demand control, but learn to move with grace through the unknown. That is moral strength, not the absence of weakness, but the mastery of it. The courage to remain true when temptation whispers, the discipline to act with love when anger burns, the humility to forgive when pride demands revenge. Moral strength is quiet. It does not parade itself. It is the steady hand that holds peace in chaos. It is the conscience that refuses to sell its soul for applause. It is the invisible wealth of the soul, the kind of wealth that cannot be measured in coins but in character. The world does not celebrate moral strength because it cannot monetize it. It does not trend on screens. It is built in secret, in quiet decisions that no one applauds, in choosing honesty over gain, patience over power, integrity over influence. But every time you choose principle over pleasure, you fortify your soul. You become a fortress in a culture of compromise. And when others see you, they may not understand your peace, but they will feel its gravity. You begin to realize that the wealth you once pursued was too small for you. Money can buy security, but it cannot buy serenity. It can buy followers, but not faith. It can purchase comfort, but not courage. True wealth is not accumulation. It is alignment. It is when your outer life begins to mirror your inner truth. It is when what you say, what you believe, and what you do become one. That alignment is the rarest currency in the world, and it is the only one you can take beyond it. Transformation does not make you larger in the eyes of others, it makes you deeper in the eyes of eternity. You become less concerned with being seen, and more concerned with being real. You stop striving to prove your worth and start embodying it. You stop asking life to get easier and start asking yourself to get stronger. That is the mark of the awakened. They no longer seek to escape their circumstances, because they have discovered that the kingdom of heaven is not found in another place, but in another perception. And that perception changes everything. You start to see wealth in simplicity, beauty in ordinary days, purpose in pain, and grace in imperfection. You start to realize that holiness is not separation from the world, but transformation within it. To walk through chaos and remain kind, that is divine. To face loss and remain grateful, that is sacred. To stand in darkness and still choose light, that is what it means to be reborn. Rebirth is not a single moment of revelation. It is a daily resurrection. Every morning you wake, you are given the chance to rise again, to let the old self die one decision at a time. You die to resentment by forgiving. You die to pride by serving. You die to fear by moving forward anyway. The resurrection of the Spirit happens not in grand gestures, but in small acts of faith repeated faithfully. It is not a miracle you wait for. It is a discipline you practice. And when you live this way long enough, your life begins to radiate a quiet authority. Not the authority of dominance, but of depth, the kind that comes from having faced the storm and found stillness within it. The kind that speaks without shouting, that teaches without preaching, that loves without demanding. You become a living sermon, not a loud one, but a luminous one. And in your presence, others remember what real wealth feels like. Peace that cannot be purchased, joy that cannot be imitated, and strength that cannot be shaken.